Where's everybody at? I'm just waiting for more people to join up here. We only have 9 current viewers, so I'm trying to get that number up before I start talking about stuff. Am I wrong on what time class starts? What is going on here? Usually there's a lot more people in here. I thought that class started at 8:16. Is that wrong? CNUSD. How come we only have 9 people? Is the link wrong? Oh, I see. Doesn't start until, oh, I see. I see. Okay. I just was wrong. Sorry, my mistake. Thanks, Jason. I'll keep waiting here then. I looked at the wrong. I looked at period 3. Period 3 starts at 9:16. I thought that period 2 started at 8:16. That was my mistake. Whoops. All right, Mr. Knight, have a hypothetical question. I started playing a game called Wolfenstein: The New Order. I'm familiar with it, in which Germany won World War II and lasted until 1960. How superior would Germany's tech have to be in order to last that long in real life? You know, that's always a dangerous game when you get into alternate history, is essentially what we're talking about there. There's no, because it didn't happen, there's, to be honest, if I'm getting a little history graduate degree on you, I apologize, but um, you know, in my life, I've spent a lot of time studying history, and you know, I teach at the college level and stuff. Um, and one of the things that is really strictly kind of hammered into you when you're learning about history is um, to avoid making arguments based on evidence that never existed, because we only have the evidence that did exist. And so it's kind of like saying, how many people would have died if the COVID vaccine didn't get out? We don't really know what that number would have been. We can take guesses at it, but at the end of the day, they're nothing better than just guesses. So in the scenario that you proposed to me, German technology during World War II was outstanding. But towards the end of the war, one of the reasons that Germany lost the war is precisely because they had really run low on resources. And so one of the things that makes that answer in particular difficult to come up with is that Germany was in a real bad state of affairs by the end of World War II. And economically, they were struggling to continue to produce wartime materials. That being said, they were still committing an effort to research and development. What I can tell you is this. Here's what did happen. Obviously, Germany lost. The Soviet Union, allied with the Americans and the British, all of them won the war. The Soviet Union went into Germany and took from East Germany all of the best German scientists, developers, blueprints for weapons, for submarines, for planes, and the Soviets continued making their own equipment based on German designs all the way through the 1970s. So from the end of World War II in 1945, the Soviets took all that technology that the Germans had, and they were still developing subs in like the mid 70s that were based on German submarine designs from the 1940s, which goes to show you, in some sense, one, how much more advanced German technology was than Russian technology at the time, but number two, also the crippling nature of communism in Russia really inhibited innovation. And so they continued relying on these old German designs. Meanwhile, America, of course, had super advanced technology. If you go down to San Diego, there's a ship that's permanently docked down there, the USS Midway. It's an aircraft carrier that got designated in right around 1945 and it was used by the US Navy all the way up until I think 1991. So it was used for about 46 years. And every so often they would bring the USS Midway aircraft carrier in for new fitments, new technology and stuff. So if you look at the type of technology on the USS Midway, it was beyond advanced. And then you go in that same place, right next, literally right down the way from where the Midway is, there's a Russian submarine from the late 70s that's also docked down there that you can go and take a tour of. And you take a look at it and it's like, holy smokes. It's no wonder that the Soviet Union lost the Cold War, because there was no innovation going on in their technology. They were still using super old designs that they ripped off from the Germans at the end of the war. And so, you know, so to your point, even though I can't make an accurate estimation about how advanced their technology would have had to be in order to potentially last that long, the point remains that German technology was super advanced, and it was used in the post-war era mostly by the Russians. But also too, America hired German, there were several German scientists that got jobs here in America as well after the war. And so, German technology was nothing to sneeze at. The designs, the innovation was there, but the economic situation in Germany at the end of the Second World War was a complete disaster. So it would have been, and it was hard for them to bounce back from that. Does that answer your question? I don't know if it even answers your question or not, but hopefully so. All right, folks. Well, now finally we're getting to, I started the class a little bit early here today, but now we're finally at 8:28. Oh, Victoria asked, who teaches the AP US History class? That would be Mrs. Walker, who has her classroom right next door to mine in the STEM building. So AP US History is taught by Mrs. Walker. All right. So, today I'm going to be taking a brief divergence from the Second World War, and we're going to be talking about a separate event that started before the war even started, but then continued on through the war, and it's an event that I'm sure that most of you have probably heard of at some point or another. It's called the Holocaust. Now, the reason that we're taking a brief segue here today, or not segue, what's the word that I'm looking for? Tangent today, over to kind of a different subject matter, is because they're happening at the same time. They're not the same thing. World War II and the Holocaust are separate events, but they coincide with one another. They happen at the same time. And so, so we're going to take some time to understand. Detour. Thank you. Yes, detour. All right. So we're going to take a slight detour today and start talking about the Holocaust and how it comes about. Because as I've mentioned to you guys before, and I've kind of given you a brief preview of some of these things when we talked about Kristallnacht in the previous unit and stuff like that. But we're going to talk a little more today about how the the Nazis initiated this horrible campaign of genocide against Jewish folks and other people during the late 1930s and then throughout World War II. So, without further ado, I'm going to pop over here to my desktop and pull the PowerPoint up here. All right, so Road to the Holocaust. This is at a different part. I've skipped down in the PowerPoint. These slides are available, but I'm kind of doing them a little bit out of order. And the reason for that is because the next video assignment, and I won't get all the way through this today because we have a shortened class, but I will finish it on Tuesday. And the next video assignment that you get on Tuesday will have to do with this subject matter. So this is going to take about a class and a half to get through. Road to the Holocaust, the Nuremberg Laws, Kristallnacht, and the ghettos. And so I'm going to start by showing you this quote here. Nature is cruel, so we may be cruel too. I have the right to remove millions of an inferior race that breeds like vermin. And that is Adolf Hitler who wrote that. And of course, this is the Nazi flag here. And then another quote, the victor will never be asked if he told the truth. So this quote right here goes to demonstrate that idea that we've talked about going all the way back to the age of imperialism that we learned about first semester, social Darwinism. Remember that as we were moving through the age of imperialism into World War I, the interwar years, strong nationalist sentiments and growing nationalist sentiments in Europe and in America created an environment where it became very easy for people of a particular ethnic background to view themselves as superior to another. And the idea of social Darwinism is kind of, again, taking the ideas of Charles Darwin, who came up with survival of the fittest and was talking about the theory of evolution and other things like that, which have since, remained to be extremely important studies in naturalism and stuff. This idea of social Darwinism was taking and twisting that into a new narrative that really had nothing to do with Charles Darwin. It takes his name, but is a completely different thing. And Charles Darwin didn't come up with social Darwinism. Social Darwinism came around later, many, many decades after Charles Darwin's theories first emerged. And so this idea of nature being cruel, how in nature we see animals, devour other animals alive or grotesque, merciless events that happen in nature. And the idea of social Darwinism is basically saying, and this quote from Hitler himself is basically saying, if nature is cruel, humans are a product of nature, and we are cruel as well. And it is the prerogative of Hitler in Germany, as well as, let's say, Stalin in Russia and other totalitarian dictators, to remove foreign elements who are viewed as somehow lesser than the larger nation of people who live in a particular area. Let's see, what did Venkata say here? That's sad. Yes, it is sad. It's very sad. So Hitler and his, what he called the ultimate answer. Beginning in 1933, the Aryan race was declared the purest of all. Hitler said that German Aryans, typically blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans, were the most, quote-unquote, evolved class of people, okay? And the reason that that's problematic is because humans, if you take and look at human DNA, all right, human DNA, you could take an Aboriginal Australian and an Alaskan Eskimo or Inuit, and they will share 99.9% of the same genes, okay? There is not such a thing as some races or ethnicities of humans being more evolved, but they didn't have the human genome mapped at this time. The human genome didn't get mapped until my lifetime, okay? In the 90s sometime, or maybe not even then. 2003, I think, is when the Human Genome Project happened. Okay, so they don't know anything about human genetics at this point, all right? It's an extremely pseudo-scientific, which means non-real science, pseudo-scientific study about bloodlines and other things like that, and blood purity or racial purity. All of it is a bunch of blarney. It's nonsense. Okay, but beginning in 1933 in Germany, the Aryan race was declared the purest of all, and they began blaming other quote-unquote inferior races for the problems of Germany, such as Jewish folks. Now, gypsies is a term that in recent years it has become not politically correct to say. Okay, so I do hope that I'm not offending anyone by including that in this PowerPoint. It's not meant to be. Only recently has a new term emerged to describe folks of this background known as Roma folks or Romani folks. And so, that is something that I do need to be clear about. Who are gypsies, quote unquote? They're a group of kind of nomadic city dwellers in various European states, and they're known frequently for, to be honest, like there are some problems with Romani folks in Europe. What ends up happening a lot of times is that they move to cities and they become kind of merchants or street dwellers, beggars, things like that. And there were a lot of reasons that, due to crime and racism, that the Roma folks across Europe were viewed as problematic. Some of them rooted in truth, others exaggerated for the purpose of racism. So it's a delicate topic, but as I said, sometimes people, if I say Romani people, because it's still not a super commonly used word rather. Sometimes people are a little confused on the group of people that I'm referring to, but it is this group of folks who really were treated absolutely horribly during the Holocaust. And then, of course, homosexuals, anyone who was of Slavic descent, Eastern Europeans, prisoners, anyone who was mentally or physically disabled, all of these people became victims of this racial ideology that is deliberately being advanced by Hitler and the rest of the Nazi Party at this time. We need to just cover a couple of myths, or maybe misunderstandings would be a better word, but misunderstandings about the Holocaust. A lot of times, for those folks that may not know a lot about the Holocaust, they may know that Jewish folks made up a significant portion of the people who were killed, but we need to be clear that Jewish folks were not the only ones who were persecuted during the Holocaust. Of the about 11 million people who lost their lives during the Holocaust, about 5.5 million of them were Jewish. Now, if we're taking and looking at it as a pie chart, that would mean that half of the pie would be Jewish folks. The other half of the pie would then be further subdivided into other categories. But so Jewish people made up the largest group of people who were persecuted during the Holocaust, but it wasn't only Jewish people who were executed, murdered during the Holocaust. There were a good number of other folks too who sometimes kind of get forgotten a little bit, and I feel like it's important to be clear about it because we don't want another Holocaust happening. And so it makes this history very, very important. When I was in France 2 years ago with my sister and I went to the Holocaust Museum in France, in Paris. And if you're ever in Paris, boy, wow, what a powerful experience, honestly. It's grim. There's no other way around it than to describe it as just beyond brutal and grim. And I must say that of all of the events in history, the Holocaust isn't my favorite to talk about, precisely because of how horrible it is. It's extremely, extremely sad. And I'd love to be able to tell you that we're at a point in history where everybody learned their lessons and something like this couldn't happen again or whatever, but unfortunately I just don't think that that's the case. But precisely because of that, it makes it that much more important to learn about. there have been many, many movies, books, and so on made since the Holocaust, telling stories of people who either went through the Holocaust or survived the Holocaust, or are retelling stories of people who died in the Holocaust, or what have you. And you probably have heard of some of them before. Elie Wiesel's Night is probably one of the most important pieces of literature that came out of it. Another one by Gerda Weissman Klein called All But My Life is another amazing story from the perspective of a Jewish girl who survived the Holocaust and the things that she went through as she was in a concentration camp. And then Boy in the Striped Pajamas is another one. There are many, many stories that have been told in the decades since the end of World War II to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive. So these are important stories to tell, and I want to be inclusive of everyone who was a victim of them. Another myth that a lot of times people don't have right is that the United States entered into World War II to end the Holocaust, and that's a very common misconception. A lot of times people think that World War II, or that America joined World War II because they knew about the Holocaust and wanted to put an end to it, and that's just not the case. For multiple reasons. Number one, World War II, the way that America gets into it is the bombing of Pearl Harbor. When America first gets into the war, they're not even declaring war against Germany, much less fighting for the Holocaust, purpose of the Holocaust, or ending the Holocaust. They declare war against Japan. And that's really the focus in the early days of America's fight in World War II. It has nothing to do with even Europe. It has everything to do with Japan. So the United States does not enter into World War II to end the Holocaust. In fact, people knew about the discrimination against the Jews in Germany even before World War II ever even started. Okay, America knew about these things. Here's the thing that is even worse about it, is that although America didn't know about concentration camps or death camps, which don't come until after the war has already been going on for a while, but not only did they know about the discriminatory policies, there were people in America who were applauding the Germans for their policies against Jewish folks, anti-Semitic policies. Okay, to name a few: Walt Disney, Henry Ford, Joe Kennedy, who was JFK's dad. All of these guys were prominent American wealthy businessmen or political figures who were profoundly anti-Semitic. And so, America doesn't exactly have the best track record with defending Jewish civil rights going back to the pre-World War II times. It's not until everyone becomes aware of the absolute horror of the Holocaust that America starts getting better about protecting the civil rights of Jewish folks and cracking down on anti-Semitic attitudes and things like that. So that's another one. And then the other one being that World War II was fought because of the Holocaust. And again, no, because the extent of the Holocaust gets worse as the war goes on. The Holocaust, Hitler continues to up the aggression against Jewish folks and others. As the war starts turning against his favor, he takes out his aggression on Jewish folks. So let's talk about the progression of discrimination here that happens during the Holocaust. The Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler seized power in 1933 and slowly began their program against the Jews of Germany, which started with laws. Each year in Germany led to harsher laws, harsher policies directed towards the Jews. And we talked about social Darwinism and this idea of eugenics, which is a pseudoscience about purity of bloodlines. Hitler believed in social Darwinism, the idea that society operated on the principle of survival of the fittest. So for Hitler, the European master race was blonde hair, blue-eyed, and white-skinned, what he termed the Aryan race. Here you can see propaganda posters depicting that same kind of imagery about blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans. It was the Nazi women's role to produce racially pure Germans for the Reich, okay, the Third Reich. Here you had the School for German School for German Girls in the Hitler Youth Organization, where all 10-year-old boys were German boys were mandated to join the Hitler Youth Organization, where they would undergo serious cultural brainwashing, developing negative attitudes towards Jewish people. It was the duty of young men, once you became of age, to join the military and fight for the Reich. All right? German women, again, being expected to play a more conservative role as housewives and mothers to secure the purity of the German race. Eugenics was where Hitler believed that the nation had become weak because the German bloodlines had been corrupted by the infusion of degenerate elements into its bloodstream. These people who were viewed as somehow less than human because of any number of different things. Maybe they were, Slavic descent. In other words, they were from Eastern Europe. Maybe they were Jewish. Maybe they had a mental or physical disability. I just watched a video last night of a British gentleman, who was born with a genetic disorder known as, I think it's called Treacher-Collins syndrome. Treacher-Collins, I think, is the name of it. And it's a genetic disorder where your bone structure in your face doesn't develop right in the womb. And babies are born with drooping eyes because the cheekbones don't form properly, and a weak chin. And I listened to this man speak about growing up with this disorder, and it's quite clear when you look at him that something is not right. And honestly, I couldn't believe what an amazing human being to have gone through the unbelievable torture and bullying that he went through. Never ever thinking that he would, be involved in a relationship, that he was too ugly. The amount of times kids would gang up on him and torture him and bully him and resorting to drugs and alcohol. His parents, that was the other side of it. His mom and dad, 5 minutes after he was born, abandoned him. They just left him at the hospital. And so, this poor guy who went through these things, and his brain's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with him. He's not a bad person. And it would be this kind of person who was targeted by these horrible policies. It's just heartbreaking, just absolutely heartbreaking. And so, in his opinion, these people were deemed unworthy of life. We're talking about human beings here, folks. Okay, we're talking about people. It's really awful. And if you look at this piece here, this poster is a classic kind of German Nazi propaganda poster that you would have seen in the 1930s. And basically what this says is 60,000 Reichmarks, that's what RM stands for, this is the cost of this is the cost on the state of keeping this person alive. Okay, 60,000 Reichmarks a year is the cost it takes. And the idea being here, of course, that they are purposefully trying to draw attention to the fact that these people who have some sort of disorder or whatever are a burden to the state and don't belong, that they don't deserve to live. How anyone could be persuaded by this? Where's the morality? Where's the heart? That, we're humans. There's a thing that separates humans from the rest of nature. Humans have a responsibility because of our brain capacity and also because of our compassion to be kind to people. And the ruthless attitude, the dog-eat-dog mentality of the Nazis really was so devoid of passion, of compassion. There was no, and these propaganda campaigns were extremely effective at hardening people's hearts and getting them to truly believe that somehow they were superior to everyone else, and everyone else who doesn't look like them or talk like them are somehow deemed unworthy of living. Horrible. Beyond horrible. And I really hope that you guys keep an open ear to those kinds of things, because there's no place for it in humanity. There's just no place for it. And so what we see happen is German doctors beginning to evaluate the facial features. And again, this is complete bogus science, guys. Okay, this is complete bogus science. There is not one thing to substantiate that any of this has anything to do with your DNA makeup. But they were very motivated by these racial policies that were being put into place by the Nazis in Germany, and they start measuring the features of people's faces, how big their noses are, what color their hair is, how big their head is, taking all of these different measurements with rulers or calipers, like this young girl here and this gentleman here, to measure the width of his nose, if he's too wide, if he's got too wide of a nose to be German. This is insane. Okay, this is absolutely insane. Nothing like this should ever happen again in history. Also, using these plastic or porcelain eye color things. These are porcelain eyes that are used on a scale to find where your eye, which one was closest to your eye color or the patient's eye color, to deem if their eyes were light enough to be considered German. Which is, again, ridiculous, because there's plenty of people who are Jewish who have light-colored eyes, green eyes, blue eyes, okay? It all comes down to a random roll of the genetic dice when your parents conceive you. And even between siblings, your genetics are not going to be 100% the same. That's why when people do those DNA tests, siblings do DNA tests, sometimes they come out with slightly different results, okay? But again, going back to the idea that none of this is based in science, so they rely on this range of pseudo-scientific disciplines to identify individuals of either superior or inferior heredity. Here was another poster released at the time comparing an Aboriginal African descent person, Australian descent person, against an Aryan descent person. And it goes without saying that this is deliberately made to try to alter people's opinion to believe that one is more beautiful versus uglier, one is more evolved versus less evolved, one is more superior to the other one being inferior. And it would be very easy for people to, every time you see posters like this, to be polarized in your views of people who are different than you. Here's another instrument used to measure the size of a person's head. Here you can see, and I know this isn't a very clear image, but this was an image of teachers trying to identify students coming into a German school and whether or not they are of German descent or Jewish descent. Because sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes Jewish folks have certain ethnic, physical characteristics as a result of Jewish people frequently marrying and having children with other Jewish people. Going back in time, several thousand years, Judaism is a religion, but the Jewish faith is also accompanied by an ethnic identity, where there are certain cultural practices and physical characteristics, and that's not always the case, but it's sometimes the case, and it was more so even in this time in World War II, a century ago. And so, again, all of these kinds of policies being used to discriminate against Jewish folks and really anyone who doesn't look like an Aryan German race person. Okay, I'm kind of going through this. Here you can see a cemetery of euthanasia victims. Euthanasia is a euphemism for murdering people. Okay, people who are put to death. Euthanasia is a term that is used to describe the execution of someone. Okay, if you euthanize your pet when they have cancer, you're putting your pet down. Okay, euthanasia when it comes to humans is just killing people. Okay, so Hitler targeted the Jews in particular, and the Jewish population in Germany at this time made up less than 1% of the population, which means, if you're really thinking about it, the threat that the Jewish population posed to Germany was really quite minuscule. Okay, but existing stereotypes and prejudices against Jewish folks gave Hitler a convenient scapegoat for the economic problems that Germany had been going through since the Great Depression. So when people started formulating this false connection between Jewish people, because they already were predisposed not to like them, with the economic conditions that German people were facing, this helped to extremize people's discriminatory views against Jews and other ethnic minorities in Germany at that time. And so we see more propaganda posters being put out. And here you can see a stereotypically drawn Jewish man and a finger here, like putting the Jewish person back in his place. I am German, you are Jewish. Okay, and again, it's this kind of imagery that is propaganda used by Hitler and his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, to get these German people to turn a blind eye to prejudice against Jewish people. 2 months after being named chancellor, one of the laws that gets passed is that Hitler announces a boycott of all Jewish shops and says that German people can no longer shop at Jewish businesses, can't be using Jewish goods, can't be visiting Jewish doctors, can't be hiring Jewish lawyers, those kinds of things. And again, more stereotypically drawn propaganda. Emigration. Many Jews decided to leave Germany to escape the growing persecution as a result of the laws that were being passed. But it was incredibly difficult for Jewish people to obtain exit visas to be able to leave Germany. And those people who did leave were faced with high taxes when they left Germany. And also, to be honest with you, It's not just because they leave Germany doesn't mean discrimination goes away, because as I said, anti-Semitic attitudes were very commonplace in many places in Europe at this time. So even if they left Germany, it wasn't a guarantee that they weren't going to face hostility from the countries that they chose to move to around the world. Folks, that brings me up to 9 a.m., which I think is the end of my time. So I will call it here. We will continue talking about the Holocaust and the road to, the execution of Jews and death camps and gas chambers and all of that sort of stuff. What's called the final solution as we move into Tuesday's lecture. Sorry for the kind of dark content today. I don't mean to make anyone feel sad or depressed or anything like that, but it's important history, and we need to honor it and carry it with us so that these same kinds of mistakes don't happen again. Have a wonderful weekend.